Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Hope you guys been enjoying the content channel as of late. Kind of interesting video for today. Kind of specific because I'm actually kind of interested in talking about finances and stuff. I find that stuff to be interesting in the world of movies as much as other topics here and there. Um, but this past weekend, we just had the latest chapter in the Strangers series, The Strangers Chapter 3, which rounds out the planned out trilogy that Lionsgate had planned out. And did not open to the strongest numbers. I think it opened to something like 5 million or something like that. Didn't even make the charts, or didn't make the top five that weekend. So and there's been uh, some stuff talked about in terms of the finances that I feel like are either either not completely true or not being represented correctly. Because this specific trilogy is an interesting investment because for those who don't know, this trilogy was planned out right from the start, so much so that the that Lionsgate, the distributors, and financiers, I believe, um, they allowed the filmmaker to shoot all three movies back to back. So it's not the case of they made the first film and made a bunch of money, and then they went off to do another two movies. They from day one had decided to do three films, um, and uh, and they apparently shot them all in the span of like 5 or 6 months, like all three movies in like 5 6 months. So that's why you had strangers films coming out for the past like 2 or 3 years. We had the first film come out in 2024, last chapter 2 coming out last year, and now this year with chapter 3. So now that the whole trilogy is over, I just kind of want to talk about a little bit about the finances behind it, because there were some stuff that I read about from Variety and stuff that just didn't necessarily ring as true. So so I broke it all down like we usually do, and I'm gonna give you guys my view as to what I think uh, is really going on, and if this trilogy really was a success, because I actually have my doubts on that. So we're gonna break it all down as we always do, and I'm gonna leave some space here so you guys can see what I'm talking about throughout this video. But let's get started in talking about the Strangers trilogy. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, of course, production. So we know that the first two films cost around $8.5 million each. I'm going to assume, because we don't have any hard numbers on the third film, that it's roughly the same. So we're going to say $8.5 million per film. So when you times that by three, because we don't know about the marketing expenses that are also attributed to these movies, um, small, but still qualifying as part of the investment. Just on production alone, if we were to believe that the third film cost 8.5 million, as much as the other films did, we're looking at an investment total of $25.5 million. Now, if you go off of by what Variety is saying, they've been told they were told that Lionsgate's only spent $20 million on the entire trilogy. So that would mean, because when you do 8.5, times two, you get $17 million, because that'd be as much money that's been spent so far on the first two movies. So that would mean that the third film would be $3 million, which I doubt it's the case. So there in and of itself is some misconceptions or some lies maybe being spewed, because that's clearly not true. So 25.5 million might be a little bit more in the range of what they spent, for this trilogy. So that's your investment total. So now, if you guys remember how box office works, there is, and we're talking about three movies here, right? So as a whole, as an entire package from chapter 1 to chapter 3, $25.5 million was spent on production. We don't know about marketing, but we know that $25.5 million was spent strictly on the production. So when you talk about a break-even point when it comes to overall production, seeing a return on that type of investment alone. So on individual basis, right? If we're just talking about just what the films have to do on their own, right? If it's 8.5 million, you times that by 2, each film collectively would have to do around $17 million. Now, as an entire package, right? As an entire package, when you combine all that together, it's $25.5 million. You times that by 2, the entire investment as it stands would be $51 million. So $51 million is what they would need to make in order to see a return on investment. Now, the other thing that we have to remember, though, is that these films played in theaters. So there's a theatrical distribution that has to be taken into account. So ticket sales, 50% cuts, all that has to be taken into account. So the film, like as a collective, it cannot be just $51 million that they make. They have to make more than that because of the consideration of the type of cuts that go back to the theaters. So, in terms of a gross requirement, when it comes to individual movies, just chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 on their own, those movies, in terms of seeing a return on investment as just individual film movies, they would have to do $34 million a piece. But as a whole, as an entire investment as it stands, the Strangers trilogy collectively has to have gone to do at least $102 million in order to see a return on investment. So that's the number that we have to find and see if that is if truly the case, and where chapter 3 has to be in order to meet that quota. So $102 million is what this series needs to make. So now let's break down, the movies themselves and seeing what money they've made so far and where chapter 3 needs to be. So let's start with chapter 1. So chapter 1 came out on May 17th, 2024, and it pulled $48.16 million. So for a gross requirement for an individual film, needing to be $34 million, the first film went off and did very well. Became profitable as an individual film and is obviously a great contributor to this whole investment as it stands. So chapter 1, fine on its own. So now we look at chapter 2. Chapter 2 came out in September 26, 2025. So first film came out right at in the beginning of the summer season. Chapter 2 is now coming outside of that summer season. Now in its box office, this one took a major dip. So in this case, it did $21.92 million. Now, that's just in theaters, so maybe there's a good possibility that it was able to recuperate some of its losses from streaming, but we don't have any hard evidence or any proof to that claim. So as it stands, 21.92 against its gross requirement, which is 34 million. Obviously, chapter 2 fell short of expectations and failed, at least in terms of the theatrical run. So it didn't become profitable. And in terms of a contributor to the investment itself, it's not, particularly a great part towards it, but it's something. So now let's look at chapter 3. So chapter 3 came out last week, February 6, 2026. So, and notice also the change of time. We went from the summer season, which is where you put a lot of your heavy hitters as in terms of a studio. Then they went outside of the summer season, and now they're completely away from the summer season and at the tail end of the winter season and entering the spring season. So you see the difference. You see how things are kind of moving away from Pacific regions or Pacific seasons because of what they probably see less returns out of investments. So chapter 3, so far as it stands, as far as the numbers I read, it's obviously higher at this point. But as far as I read, $3.5 million so far. uh, and that is not great. Obviously, the other films went off and did a little bit stronger in their openings. I think Chapter Two ended off doing like what was it, like 5 million on its opening. So it's not good, So obviously, I think it's safe to say, because of how low that number is, I seriously doubt that this is going to become profitable. And I think that as a contributor to the investment itself, it's going to be very, very low. So now let's take all the numbers that we have so far. So we have Chapter 1, which went off to do 48.16 million, Chapter 2, which went off to do 21.92 million, and currently, as it stands, Chapter 3 doing $3.5 million. So you combine all of that together, and so far, as per what the movies have done, they have made collectively $73.58 million. And the uh, if the gross requirement as a whole is $102 million, you minus that out. And when it comes to Chapter 3, as a production, as we know, it would have to do at least $34 million in order to become profitable as an individual investment. But as a whole package, in terms of a whole package, when it comes to the overall investment at hand, the film would need to go off to do $28.42 million in order to secure the kind of money that, in order to meet at the gross requirement as an entire investment. So essentially, the movie has to do better than Chapter 2, and Chapter 2 was already doing way half of what the original film had done. So clearly, it's not going to become profitable. It's just been more diminishing returns each film has come out, and I think it's a lot to do with just perception on this, because I've not heard a lot of good things about the series, and less so in the marketing efforts as well. I don't think they really cared to market this new film, um, and there was just not a whole lot of attention given this time around. So, um, and it's an indication again that not everything sells. Even on a smaller scale, I still preach. You should always go for low scale. But I think that the issue, I think, here is also to do with production, because I don't know how the fuck you can produce three features in the span of like 5 or 6 months. I think that sounds like a very chaotic production. And from what I read, the filmmaker would go from shooting scenes from Chapter 1 to then shooting scenes for Chapter 3. So it sounded very messy in terms of an overall production. Um, and it seems as though that might have been what was translated on screen. But you know, also, having such a a having such a consistency at a certain level, it creates fatigue. Like, there's a reason why um, certain projects wait for a certain amount of time. Yes, they take longer to produce, but 2 or 3 years down the line, you create an appetite and you create an interest. When it's like, oh, well, you're getting another one next year, and then another one the next year, you can also face fatigue from that. And it seems as though that there was fatigue on that end, or that largely because just people just flat out seemed to not like the movies, because it sounds to me that production was a little messy, and didn't exactly give a lot of room to really flesh things out. So, but yeah, as it stands, the investment as it stands, not a success story. First film, I would say, is probably the genuine success here, whereas the other two films fell short. And in terms of a contribution to the entire investment as it stands, clearly they're not going to get to the marks. If Chapter 3 has to do better than Chapter 2, and Chapter 2 was already doing half of what Chapter 1 was doing, so it's not going to happen. So, so yeah, so this is I think that some of the lessons here are don't uh, don't put all of your bets on something like this, and just keep branch it out. Give time to breathe. Because you know, I don't know who would feel confident in creating 3 feature films in that short amount of time. That just doesn't sound good. So yeah, clearly not going to be a that they're I don't have a lot of confidence that they're gonna see a return on investment on this. They might label it as a success to some extent, maybe. Like I said, there's reports saying that the investment actually was $20 million, which, okay, you break that shit down, then $20 million times that by two, so 40 million is what they would need to make, so $80 million. So sure, that looks a little more approachable, but clearly that's not true because of just what we know, of the first 2 movies of them being made for $8.5 million a piece. I can't buy that third film is made for $3 million. I can't believe that that's true. So maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't know, but yeah. So yeah, so more room to breathe and more consideration of just overall delivery and execution. I feel like would have saved this a little bit more because it's small as hell in terms of just an individual investment. So they don't have to do all that much. But when you do what you do with this, you're creating fatigue, you're creating disinterest, and it seems like the quality dipped. So and with all those things made at simultaneously, you are making the investment a lot more heavy than it needed to be initially. So so yeah, I don't think it's a success story. But you guys let me know. Do you guys think that The Strangers, as an entire trilogy, have you seen the entire trilogy? Let me know. Is it worth watching? For me, I saw the trailers and I was like, no, this is not up my alley. Let me know. Do you think it's a good little series, or do you think it suffered? And what do you think in terms of an investment? Do you guys think that it is a genuine success, or do you guys believe like me, where I just don't see it really? Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.